Hi. Um, Thank you for having me here tonight. So, I express myself best through writing. It's how I communicate what so often I can't say. So, tonight I'm going to give a voice to the words that are in my heart. As a child, I slipped below the surface of a lake, and when I think of him, it also feels like drowning. The sound of being underwater, a high-pitched ringing, and everything seems to be moving in slow motion, except my heart is racing. My lungs burn from holding my breath, and my stomach wrings itself like a pair of worried hands. I feel like I'm heavy, weighed down, screaming inside, but nothing comes out. That's how I feel when I think of my rapist. Sex was not a topic ever discussed in my home growing up. I learned about puberty through the public school system and might have had a vague and terribly uncomfortable conversation with my mom about how babies were made and that sex was only for marriage. The focus was mostly on what you shouldn't do, and it seemed there were many things to be frowned upon. This led to years of frustration and seeking affection from men. The summer before my senior year at Michigan State was right after my first serious relationship ended. I was home waiting tables, and a coworker and I ended up going on a second date. And all was fine and consensual until it wasn't. I was pinned on my stomach to the floor of a basement bedroom, his hands on my wrist, his breath on my ear, telling me to be quiet and not wake his younger brother in the room next door. And I froze. The only way I could endure what was happening to me was to separate my mind from the physical pain. It felt like an out-of-body experience. I don't remember clearly what happened afterward, how long I was there, how I got dressed and up the stairs, but I do remember eventually being in my car, shocked with the realization that I had just been raped. I debated if I should go to the police or to the hospital, and I worried they'd involve my parents. Ultimately, my shame and fear kept me silent, and I drove home. The next day, we worked together. I cannot put into words the humiliation it is to be assaulted in such a crude and violent way, to not even be able to look at that person, let alone speak, all while serving customers food. I used to imagine in detail what it would be like to cause them an ounce of the agony I felt. I had so many well-thought-out plans, but I could never bring myself to act on them. The hate was eating me alive. I prayed for God to stop my pain and fix me, demanding, "Why did you let this happen to me?" So many prayers for vengeance. When he didn't answer those prayers how I saw fit, I grew bitter and gave up on him. To cope with my fear and shame, I would try to block out the memory by numbing myself with substances and distractions, but they only worked for a while. I became so good at faking that nothing traumatic had happened that I couldn't separate who I had become from who I was before the rape. I met my husband 6 weeks after my assault, and I can't deny the timing was profound in detouring my self-destruction. I had built a fortress around my heart where I kept my secret, and I thought if I put enough blocks around me, enough weight on it, I could shove it down and keep it there. But most of the time I could go about my life as if nothing ever happened. But every once in a while, something would break those walls and my shame would creep out. It could be an unexpected rape scene in a movie or a presidential campaign. Someone not listening to what I said, and I'd feel overwhelmed and defeated, as if I didn't matter. I didn't know I was experiencing PTSD symptoms. And in those times, instead of seeing it for what it was and recognizing that these were my emotions I had never dealt with from the trauma, I deflected them onto my husband and my children. I couldn't tell anyone the real reason I was falling apart. One day I was driving, and in my mind, I distinctly heard, "You are a runner," and I laughed out loud. If you know me, you know I only run if my life depended on it. Then I heard, "You are a runner from your problems, from confrontation, from pain. You run from the ugly," and I cried. I had never had an experience like that before. For me, moving past my rape was the only way I was going to heal, and the only way to move forward was to face it head on. I had to stop focusing on what my rapist did to me and start focusing on what God had done for me. Seething over my rapist gave him control over me all these years, and it kept me in a place of humiliation and silence. Turning my focus towards God freed me of that. This has been one of the hardest things I've ever done, but I'm standing up for the injustice in my life and to advocate for those of you who could say, that's my story too. And I can only say these things through the power of God, who is continually healing and building me up. It's not by my will that I'm up here. It's by his grace and love for me. I can't deny the recovery I've experienced is from any other means than him. For so many years, my identity has been wrapped up in who I should be and not in who I am. So while this might be my story, it's not about me. 2 years ago, I was in the vicinity of where my rapist lives, and I emotionally and physically shut down from panic. It wasn't until that moment that I realized how much control he still had over me. I finally came out to my husband and friends about my trauma and took a step starting therapy. But when that therapist and I didn't click, I took it as, well, maybe I do need just to get over this. But in my heart, I couldn't separate myself from my shame. So I sought out a local sexual assault support group, and I began to learn some healthy coping skills. This was a huge step into recovery. That fall, I attended a marriage conference where I received prayer for the first time about my assault, and it shook me to my core, because up to that point, I had never truly believed God could heal me or wanted to. After that conference, I began to see that God didn't allow the rape to happen to me. Instead, it was a violent act of power and assault by a man. Rape is not cause and effect, and we need to stop treating it as such. There's so much anger at the act itself, but also at the lack of support in the aftermath. We need to move from did you questions to do you, not did you wear something revealing, did you drink too much, and switch that dialogue to do you need an advocate at the police station, do you need me to sit and listen? We cannot destroy a person's reality simply because it didn't happen to us. Physical scars are symbols of trauma and the body's ability to repair and heal. And while the body may have repaired itself, there's a permanent mark notating that something traumatic happened. I don't understand where along the way physical scars became stories we share and tell about things we overcame, but emotional scars are a sign of weakness. I've begun to accept the possibility that maybe I'll never be completely over it. I'm not saying it's impossible, but for me personally, accepting that the healing isn't complete allows me room to struggle, to fall and pick myself back up. When I say that I'm healing, I'm moving. It's something progressive. I'm not stagnant, but I have not arrived, and that drive encourages me to help others who are also struggling to heal. And maybe it's that little piece of scar tissue left behind that motivates us to think outside of ourselves and to look to others who are suffering and say, I see you, I understand, and I'm here for you. After I felt the healing that could come from God after an assault, I saw the biggest need for this was in the church itself. I thought, how can we be a light to those who are suffering when we are suffering ourselves? I profoundly felt a need to create a space for women like myself within the Christian community, where survivors can come and feel solidarity and empathy through the comfort of the Holy Spirit and each other, and build community in an area that is so isolating. A space where we can be exposed, vulnerable, and authentic without judgment, where we can regain our voices, a place where we can let down our guard and just breathe. We need to bring sexual assault into his light and stop hiding it, and we need to see support from followers of Christ. John 1:5 says, the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness can never extinguish it. The burden of embarrassment and shame, Jesus is there to take that from you. He said, my yoke is light. We just have to cast our burdens on him. I don't know about you, but giving Jesus my brokenness isn't easy for me. But he doesn't ask for my best. He asks for me and all my imperfection. 1 in 5 women has been sexually assaulted, and the rate is 1 in 4 on college campuses. 1 in 16 men have been sexually assaulted. According to RAINN, the Rape Abuse Incest National Network, every 98 seconds, an American is sexually assaulted, and every 8 minutes, that victim is a child. Meanwhile, only 6 out of every 1,000 perpetrators will end up in prison. Look around. There are a lot of us in this room. I have 2 daughters. And there's a chance that we will have more in common than our eye color and sense of humor, and that crushes me. The reality is that there are people in this world who want to hurt others. And while I can't stop everything from happening, I can speak out against it. I can stop pretending everything is okay, and I can raise awareness and be a light of his hope, because the light casts out the darkness. I am more than a statistic. My rape will always be a part of who I am. It's a small piece, but it's not what makes me whole. I stand with you and I offer my hand. You don't have to feel small. There's so much more than this.